Welcome to the second part of our series on flexible date filtering with IBM Cognos. My name is Kevin Jacquier, and I am a Business Analytics Solutions Architect for FYI Solutions in Parsippany. In part one, we defined what we meant by flexible date filtering, as well as provided some background for how the problem evolved at a particular client that led us to this solution. In part two of this series, we'll be discussing the actual So, to build a flexible date filter, we wanted to create a model-defined filter. The reason for this is so it could be defined in one single place, reusable across multiple reports, and make it so it's easy to maintain. The first step in defining our flexible date filter is to define a set of start and end dates for the particular periods we want to be able to filter on. And we do this within Framework Manager in one of our model queries. In this case, you can see our query subject on the left here. It's called orders. And we define it in this query subject because all of the dates that we're going to be filtering on are based on the order. So you can see we have a set of start and end dates for different period ranges such as current year, current month, current week, prior year, prior month, and so forth. Now these could have been defined in a time dimension table and then imported in, but we chose to just build them as expressions within our query subjects. And you can see some of these expressions shown here in the table to the lower right of the screen. Now this was an Oracle solution, so we're utilizing the trunc command primarily to get rid of the time element of the Oracle date, but also to bring us to the beginning of the year or the beginning of the month as well. You can see that with a couple of the parameters. And we also use the add months function. You can see for the prior year start, we're going back 12 months to get us into the prior year, and then using the trunc command to get us to the beginning of that prior year. Okay, and we're obviously also using the sysdate function from Oracle. So the second step is to identify the first of two parameter maps within Cognos Framework Manager. The first one here that we're showing is what we call the date list parameter map. This is basically where we are defining the actual dates that we're going to make available to our date filter. So the key is simply some text that's identifying the actual date fields. And this will be the same text that we're going to place into our prompts on the reports. The second column, the value column, is how we're actually defining how we are going to obtain the specific date. So you can notice that each of these is wrapped around a trunc function, and this is basically to remove the time portion of the Oracle date column. And they're also wrapped around a cast as date function. And this was necessary to get this column in the proper format so that we can compare it to the results from the Cognos date prompt. So basically we're identifying one row for each date that we want to supply. And we need to make sure that we truncate the time elements and we make sure that's in a format that's compatible for all of the different options of our period ranges. And we also see that we can use different SQL to get the date. We can just go directly to a date column, or we can actually make a function call into that's going to return a date. The third step is to define the second parameter map. This parameter map, which I'm calling date filters, is where we're going to define the different options for period ranges that we're going to allow. So we basically want a row in the parameter map for each of these. So as you can see, we've got a row for current year to date, current year, current month, and so on. We also have one for specified dates as well as current day. So the key, again, is going to be simply some text that's going to be also the same text that's in the prompts on the reports. And the value is going to be primarily the meat of the expression. So the prior filter is going to give us the date, which is the right-hand side of the filter, and this map is going to give us the equation and the right-hand side of the filter. And most of the time it's going to be the between and then our start and end values for the particular period. And these start and end values are what we defined in step 1. Okay. The next step is to actually create the model filter using both of the parameter maps that we identified in the previous steps. This will make this an extremely dynamic filter. So I'm calling this filter flexible date filter, and you can see in the expression what we have here. We basically have 2 calls to our 2 different parameter maps, and they're wrapped within the pound signs. So the first one is calling the date list, and the second one is calling the date filters. Within each of those, we have a prompt macro that is calling a particular prompt, which is basically what the users are going to select at report runtime, which will drive the entry into the parameter maps and return the values defined within there. Okay. Now you can see that next to the name of the prompt is the text token. This was required to make the dynamicness here. If you don't put in that token key, Cognos is going to default the value within the model and not make it flexible at runtime. So token tells it to pass, I guess, the token value when it's running this, so it will actually pass what the user selects within the prompt. The last step is to actually apply the flexible date filter into the reports. There's 2 primary steps that we have to do to each report. The first is to set up the prompts, and the second is to actually apply the filter. So let's first talk about the prompts. So as you can see here on the left, I have 3 actual prompts. The first one, which we've labeled milestone date for filtering, is where the user is actually going to identify the date to use. So this is where we're going to put in the values that were actually the keys within the date list. They will be the values that are selectable for this prompt. So that will, the selection here will drive the row that's returned from the date list parameter map. The second prompt, date ranges to report on, is what's going to drive the date filter parameter map. So the same key values in the date filter parameter map are what are in the options here for selection. So the combination of these 2 will actually build our filter. Now the third one is where the specified dates. This is only used when the date ranges to report on option is the specified dates option, where then the users can select the dates from this prompt, and that gets passed as part of it and builds the filter. Now, the second step is to just drag the filter that we defined in our model into the report query. Now, the one thing just to point out is this prompt could have been put into a report and then put into other reports using the component layout reference feature. I chose not to do that in this particular solution, primarily because some reports may want some of the dates and others may want some of the dates. Maybe all the dates or all the date ranges don't apply to every report. So then we can modify what's going into the prompts a little bit. Whereas if we use the component layout reference, it would be what was defined in that base report. So it could go. So just to recap, prior to our flexible date filter, we got to a point where we had this monster filter logic in each report. And what I mean by monster is a very long set of nested if statements going through the different dates and the different date ranges that we wanted to filter on. So you can just imagine how modifications were not only difficult but very dangerous. In addition, adding a new date or date range could significantly increase the size of this set of SQL immensely. So with our new flexible date filter solution, we now have our logic defined in the model. There's just one definition. In addition, there is only one definition per date range. We don't have to have that date range defined for every single date as we did in the past. We can also add new dates or new date ranges with zero impact. There's simply a new line within our parameter maps and then new entries into the prompts on the reports, but they're not tied to the other options as they were in the nested SQL. So adding a new one will not impact how a report runs when other options were utilized. And basically, once we've made these new additions in the model, we simply have to go into the reports and add that option into the prompts. Nothing else in the report filter itself has to change. So it's just adding a new line into the prompts of the reports. So that concludes our presentation on our flexible date filters solution within IBM Cognos. I hope that you can benefit from this. And please keep in mind that this doesn't have to be applied to just filtering. The use of parameter maps and reducing of some of this complexity could be utilized in just data items within your model query subjects. So there's a lot of different places to utilize some of the information that was presented here. Again, thank you very much for listening.